This story is about something that happened 10 years ago in my village. One day we heard the sound of an ambulance and saw a crowd gather around some accident that occurred. The person lying on the stretcher was Mr. Kim. No one knew why he fainted. In the early morning, people heard a very loud scream coming from his house. The villagers expressed suspicion, and yesterday they also saw him bring back a very large ceramic jar from somewhere. They suspected that what happened to Mr. Kim had something to do with that jar. After the ambulance had left, the villagers still gathered and gossiped about it. Some even said that Mr. Kim must have encountered some sort of ghost. Yesterday morning, Mr. Kim alone carried a hoe to the cornfield area to hoe and sow new seeds. This area was along the riverside in the village. The land was barren, only suitable for growing corn, and Mr. Kim was plowing the land with great enthusiasm. Suddenly the handle of the hoe seemed to hit something. Mr. Kim stopped. He discovered something underneath. To prevent the hoe from breaking the object below, Mr. Kim used his hand to dig up the soil. Suddenly he was surprised. Below was a black ceramic jar. People like Mr. Kim knew very well that this was an antique jar because the local government had reported that his village area had many antiques, and people who could dig antiques were going to be paid a huge amount of money. It took a while for Mr. Kim to dig up the jar. He poured out all the soil inside, but at the moment he didn't notice that there was some strange debris inside. He was quite nervous. Mr. Kim quickly slung the jar over his shoulder, hoping that no one would see it. Then he took it home, full of joy because this time he believed he was gonna get rich. When he got home, to prevent some snoopers from stealing the jar, Mr. Kim left it in the living room. That night, Mr. Kim lay awake thinking about what he would use the money for after he made his fortune, because he was so happy. He lay tossing and turning. His wife also urged him to go to sleep. At midnight, suddenly Mr. Kim smelled something rotten. He placed his hand on his nose because the smell was extremely bad. "Damn it! What's that smell? What stinks so? Did you fart?" Suspecting that his wife farted, Mr. Kim loudly asked her that. However, at this time his wife was also sleeping deeply. Just then, suddenly Mr. Kim heard someone's gasp coming from somewhere. Even stranger than that was when Mr. Kim heard the breathing sound coming from the living room. He started feeling worried. Could a thief be breaking into his house? Or are they intending to steal the jar? Thinking about that, Mr. Kim got out of bed. He reached for a flashlight to go out of the living room to check it out. As soon as the door of the living room was open, there was a hazy fog around. The inside of the living room was empty. There were no strangers at all. Mr. Kim looked around, not knowing where the breathing sound was coming from. The stench still wafted around the room. He covered his nose with his hand. The smell was like the smell of a dead rat. He didn't know where it came from. At the moment, suddenly there was a groan from the jar, which caught the attention of Mr. Kim. What was even stranger than that was that something black was protruding from the top of the jar. Mr. Kim was very surprised. The rotten smell was coming from this jar, but it was clear that when he bought the jar, he had already poured out all the sand and soil inside. At this moment, he felt curious, so he approached the jar to check. Mr. Kim pointed the flashlight towards the jar. What was that black thing that appeared to be protruding from it in the dark? Right after that, he suddenly became terrified and speechless when he witnessed what was going on. A human head was protruding from the jar. Groaning came from it. He was now numb with his legs, Mr. Kim. He raised his eyes to look inside the jar. inside the long hair that covered the face. The face looked up at Mr. Kim, blood oozing from its eyes. A very scary picture. Mr. Kim shouted. The head also slowly emerged from the jar as Mr. Kim was so scared that his face became pale. He fell on his back. For the first time in his life, he witnessed such a terrifying scene. The head emitted a stench accompanied by lifeless eyes. The mouth gradually opened wide. When it screamed, there was no tongue inside. Only then did Kim realize that inside that jar was only a moving head. He knew that he had encountered some sort of ghost, and the crumbs he spilled in the morning were his ashes, which made him even more terrified and worried. Then he felt his surroundings darken. The stench was still around, until his wife found out and called an ambulance. Later, Mr. Kim was discharged from the hospital. He was severely psychologically affected, but only for a while. The government also came and took away the jar because it was an antique dating back to ancient times. In the old days in Korea, there used to be scary customs that punished criminals. Some of them were death by jars containing poison. The victim would slowly disintegrate and die painfully when immersed in a jar. Because the stench was still clinging to his house, Mr. Kim decided to invite a shaman to come and banish the evil from this house. Unfortunately, his dream of changing his life was officially extinguished by that very scary experience.
One time I went home, I happened to meet my aunt. She told me a lot of stories from when she was in middle school. That year she was still a high school girl and had to stay in the school dormitory. When it wasn't developed, everything was very poor, and the living conditions in the dormitory were also difficult. My aunt shared a room with another girl named Ling. That night, both of them turned off the lights and went to sleep. Auntie Ling was fast asleep at the time, but in the middle of the night she started having nightmares. Her whole body was sweating like having a bath. She felt like someone was pressing down on her feet, staring at her. Ling wanted to open her eyes, but she couldn't. In a blur, Ling saw the ghost child crawling on top of her. She was scared, she wanted to scream, she wanted to pull away, but couldn't move her hands and couldn't even make a sound. The baby crawled on top of her chest, making her feel like short of breath. She tried to wake up but couldn't. In the morning, when everyone was about to go to school, my aunt saw Ling still asleep. She and another friend came to wake her up. After calling for a long time, Ling slowly woke up. When she woke up, she felt her neck suddenly feeling very heavy and painful. It was like there was something on her neck that kept her upright. The whole morning, there was no way to fix this, making her extremely miserable. The next morning, my aunt just reported to the teacher and helped bring Ling to the clinic. The doctor checked Ling's head, neck and shoulders, but still found nothing special. However, the doctor also suggested a treatment for Ling, giving her a bandage to correct her shoulders and neck. But as impossible as it may seem, after one day the pain would still not go away. Ling felt very strongly that something was sitting on her shoulder, just that she couldn't see it. Everyone in the dorm room also started talking and whispering. Some students also heard rumors that this dormitory was built on a cemetery. This information was not known to anyone, so the students just took it as a rumor until someone was actually haunted by a ghost. Another student who was my aunt's classmate also recounted, saying that on the night that she went to the toilet alone, she saw a child crawling out of the toilet. This ghost giggled through the hallway. The girl was terrified. Regarding the rumor of the child ghost, some classmates said that they knew the child's background. The story went that many years ago, one night after everyone had slept, a cry of pain came from the corridor of the teachers' quarters. The screams came from the toilet. So many curious people ran to see what was wrong. Then, in a room they saw a girl who died in a pitiful position in her pajamas, surrounded by blood flowing like a river. In the latrine they also found a dead infant. Since then, people had always seen this ghost child. What the friends recounted made Ling feel scared, wondering if the child was clinging to her or not. After that, my aunt's friends also told her and Ling to report this matter to the principal so that he could find a solution and help bring Ling to treatment. After that, my aunt and Ling went to see the principal. They told the whole story to the principal, including the dream that Ling had. The principal suddenly shouted at Ling's face, but as if shouting at someone other than her. "If you don't hurry down or I'll beat you to death!" As soon as the words ended, Ling began to feel the weight on her shoulders gradually disappear. Her shoulders became lighter. Ling was also able to stand up straight again. She looked at the principal in surprise, but the principal said nothing, only telling them to quickly return to their rooms. This incident my aunt remembers very well, and the dormitory never had a problem ever again. This is a story about some strange things happening at the hospital. Each of us knows that in hospitals there were many stories of birth, old age, sickness, and death. My story is that of a department. The department was the ICU area, or we also called it the intensive care unit. The people who lived there were all seriously ill. It could be said that all patients there had been through the gates of hell once or several times. My friend was in charge of that department, so I also heard a few special stories. The story my friend told me was that there was an old man surnamed Chen who had just had a tumor removed by a doctor, and the old man was pushed into the ICU. The surgery went well and the old man woke up quickly, but when he woke up, the old man's voice suddenly became strange. He didn't even recognize his children when they were standing beside him. Moreover, he said that he was a different person now, and stranger than that was that he even gave another person's home address and the family background. All of this confused his children, as they were extremely worried about him without knowing if this was supernatural or some after effect from surgery. The doctor said that there was indeed someone with the same condition as described who was in this room before, but that person passed away. The doctor was also surprised to hear all this information. He thought that maybe the old man was having problems after surgery. When the doctor tried to explain to Mr. Shen's children what had happened, they couldn't believe it or understand anything. They could only listen to the doctor's observations and monitoring during the treatment. The old man had another very strange thing that night, that he did not sleep, but talked into the air as if no one was listening. There were voices and laughter as if there were real people in front of him. Symptoms lasted for several days like this. One night when the old man surnamed Liu was lying on the bed next to him, he heard a noise. When Mr. Liu was lying on the bed, he looked back and saw people gathering by the old man's bed. These people didn't have their faces cleared out. Their appearance might have been fake, or they were ghosts. Suddenly there was a lot of noise both inside and outside the bed he was lying on. He was so scared that he did not dare to make a sound and could only lie still on the bed pretending to be asleep. It was almost morning when the men took away a person who had lived in Mr. Shen's bed a few days ago, but had died right before he took the bed over. The next day, 2 children came to see and visit Mr. Shen. Then Mr. Liu suddenly realized that Shen was still lying on the bed, but also talking normally. As nothing strange had happened, he said something. He said that maybe a few days ago Mr. Shen's bed had a dead person lying there, so he gained their memories. Yesterday, they came to take him away. He also had no recollection of what he heard the patient in the next bed moaning like he couldn't breathe. He turned his head and glanced vaguely, seeing something like a black figure squatting on Mr. Liu's body, and then gradually overwhelming his body, making it extremely difficult for him to breathe. Mr. Shen desperately wanted to call for help but could not make a sound or move. He couldn't move until the physical signs alarm went off and the nurse came to check on him. The patient in the next bed passed away that night. He told the nurse what he saw, but the nurse didn't believe him at all, so the old man told his children. The kids were so scared that they went to the doctor again and asked what was going on. The doctor said that this phenomenon was quite unique and was caused by different reasons that would affect the patient's recovery. After being in the ICU for a few days, he was transferred to the general ward. There was no such thing as a weird going, as to whether being in the ICU was really a commonplace. And in this world, there are supernatural things that happen, so we don't dare to lie.
This is a true horror story that's well known in my hometown. At the time, there was a couple in my village who lived with their younger brother. One day, a man from the village dashed to their house and knocked on the door. The man was panicking, dashing inside and howled, "Dead! Your brother is dead!" The older brother was mortified, unable to believe what he had heard, and repeatedly asked the man to please correct himself. But this man insisted that his brother was hunting with him when he slipped and fell into a stream. The older brother and his wife were astounded to hear this. As a result, the two followed the man and hurried to the forest's edge to check on his brother's situation. When they arrived, they noticed that there were many people standing around. Everyone was talking about the accident. At the time, it was extremely difficult for the couple to get through the crowd to see how their brother was doing. On the spot, his brother was soaking wet, pale and motionless on the ground. But his eyes were still open and dreamy, staring at the couple as if clinging to life. When the couple noticed this, they rushed to assist their younger brother. The older brother pressed his ear to his brother's heartbeat hopelessly, seeing that he was still alive. Thinking that there was still a chance to save his life, the older brother and his wife brought him home. The house was now filled with the cries of the wife and the younger brother, who was now lying motionless on the bed. The couple's worry and grief were clearly visible on each person's face. All they had to do now was wait for him to take his last breath. However, a wheezing sound came from his mouth at that moment. The couple was taken aback by the expression. The couple had just turned to look at their brother when he sat up like a spring. But this time his face was very frightening and his eyes were lifeless. When the wife noticed that her brother was awake, she couldn't contain her joy and cried and called him, but he didn't answer and just sat with his back to the couple, looking very strange. Immediately after that, he crawled onto the bed and stood up awkwardly, squirming like a zombie. He walked like a child learning how to walk, his mouth still smiling with a devilish grin. But then he collapsed back on the bed. When the wife saw her brother like that, she assumed he had just drowned, so he was tired, dizzy, and couldn't stand. Concerned for his safety, she immediately ran to help him, but when she got close to him, she felt a cold from the younger brother's body.
As soon as she touched his body, the younger brother turned to face his older brother and sister-in-law with a strange expression. He had a crazy smile on his face. His eyes were white and his irises were cloudy. He looked insane. After that, the younger brother jumped to the ground from the bed with all his legs and arms and ran out of the room as fast as an arrow. He dashed out, aiming for the door. The couple looked at him in surprise, not sure if it was because he was shocked by drowning and wondering where he could run to. Concerned about their brother, the couple decided to go out and find him. They both looked around the corner and called out their brother's name, but there was no response. After searching for a while, the husband discovered his brother in a garden corner performing a terrifying action. He sat in front of the chicken coop door before reaching inside and catching a large rooster. His next move surprised and shocked the couple. His mouth only smiled satisfiedly before he bared his teeth, grabbed the rooster hard and sucked its blood. Seeing his brother's scary expression, the couple rushed to hold him, but at the same time, he seemed to have become insane and difficult to control. When the husband noticed this, he stopped him, but he struggled, as if he wanted to get out. The husband, who was no longer strong enough to stop him, had to rely on his wife's assistance to bring him into the house. As if sensing something, the husband quickly wrapped a blanket around his body and tied him up with ropes. He hummed angrily like an animal, not saying anything. The wife suspected that their brother had gone insane after falling into the stream. When the wife discovered that her brother was behaving strangely, she was taken aback and questioned her husband, who showed a cold demeanor. Suddenly, the two were drawn to a strange phenomenon from their younger brother, which made them extremely scared. In front of them was no longer the usual gentle little brother, but a scary demon. His face changed dramatically, turning monstrous. His eyes turned blue and he grumbled like a demon. Because the husband knew his judgment was correct, he told his wife to stay at home to watch over his brother, while he ran to the next village to invite the shaman over to do an exorcism. Later, the husband and the shaman, who was known as the best shaman in the area, arrived at the house. The wife was standing outside and she said that she dare not go inside because he would go insane whenever he saw someone. With a thoughtful expression on his face after hearing the wife's explanation, the teacher went to observe the younger brother's situation. The husband was concerned and he was a little impatient to ask the shaman, but the shaman simply stated that his brother had died. When the wife heard it, she couldn't believe it. Why was her brother still able to move when he's dead? The shaman then asked the couple if they had recently seen a golden ferret around the house, which surprised him. After thinking for a while, the couple told the shaman that their brother had caught and killed a stray golden ferret in the yard last week. As soon as the shaman heard this, he asked the couple to bring him a pair of scissors. The wife immediately did as she was told. The husband then followed what the shaman told him, assisted his brother to stand up, and watched the shaman gently walk away to perform the spell. When confronted with the shaman, the younger brother was now screaming like a maniac. The shaman held the scissors in front of him and muttered an exorcism spell. Hearing the shaman's voice, the younger brother became more aggressive, turning around and shouting, baring his teeth to threaten the man. The strangest thing was that the younger brother did not speak any human language, but only called out in unknown voices. Seeing this, the shaman became enraged and howled angrily, "If you don't go, I will cut off your tail." He was now struggling and screaming, making it difficult for the older brother to hold him. After that, as soon as the shaman finished the spell, he grabbed something invisible in the air and cut it in front of the couple with his scissors. As soon as the action ended, the younger brother groaned as if he was in pain. Following that, his entire body trembled, his face turned purple, but his eyes were gentle and calm. After that, the younger brother writhed in agony. After a while of shaking, he stopped moaning but fell to the ground. The couple saw this, immediately ran to him, but the younger brother was lying motionless. His body was cold. and he didn't wake up. Witnessing that scene, the shaman announced with a sad voice that the young brother was gone. Then he quietly left. Both husband and wife burst into tears as they looked at the cold corpse. His brother's funeral was held in an uncomplicated manner. But ever since, there had been a golden ferret with its tail missing, running back and forth in front of the couple's house.
In 2012, it occurred in Guangdong, China. I was in my second year at that time. I didn't want to work part-time during my summer vacation, so I returned to my hometown. It was past 8 o'clock in the evening when I returned to the village in our small southern villages. The streets were usually less crowded than during the day, but that day there was no one. I was walking down the alley when I noticed a strange phenomenon. For a few days now, I'd noticed a circle of scattered paper dust in front of every house's door. These doors were closed, and this paper charm was probably to ward off the evil spirits. That was when I realized why there was no one on the street tonight. Someone had died in the village. Even though I didn't believe in superstitious things, I definitely still felt the hair on the back of my neck. So I didn't dare to stay in the street and dashed home shouting, "Dad! Mom! I'm back!" I exclaimed loudly. I went to school in Shanghai at the time, which was not far from home, but there was only one break per semester. So when they heard my voice, my parents greeted me cheerfully, and I noticed that my mother's face was very happy, while my father seemed a little concerned. My father approached me and pushed me into the house, refusing to let me speak. When I saw my father's worried expression, I felt strange. When my father pushed me into the house, he quickly shut the door and looked at me, terrified, as if there was something dangerous inside. When my mother noticed me asking, she explained why. It was discovered that there was a deceased person in the village and the death seemed strange. It was amusing to hear that my hometown was still superstitious about these things in this day and age. "Mom, we can't meddle in other people's domestic affairs, so don't believe these rumors," I explained. My father was irritated when he heard me say this because I didn't believe it. Then he came over and told me about Mrs. Lan's death. Miss Lan went to town a few days ago to buy food when a small truck behind her lost control and rushed towards her. Miss Lan was crushed by the wheel without having time to react. The entire car was smashed to the front. She died on the spot, and the scene was described as tragic. The most terrifying thing was not this, but Miss Lan's body, which could not close her eyes or close her mouth as if she was resentful. After that, when Miss Lan's family asked the monk to keep an eye on her, the monk stated that Miss Lan had died unexpectedly before the end of her life. As a result, Miss Lan's family sought someone to carry the coffin in accordance with the old custom. They carried the coffin for several days and nights and were still hanging around, which made my father very nervous and made him warn me not to go out at night. I agreed, but I didn't give it much thought at the time. My father truly understood me. He knew I always did my own thing and held at me. My mother was nagging next to me, and hearing her nags irritated me. So I told them I was tired and went to bed early so I wouldn't have to argue any longer. But that night I had a strange dream, or rather, a nightmare. I had a dream that I was wandering through the village streets and alleys like a maze that I couldn't get out of. I ran into some friends on the street and went for a walk. Actually, even though we didn't get the full experience of a big city there, the beautiful scenery here was really nice. Especially the hill behind the village, because in recent years, people have paid a lot of attention to the ecological environment. The fresh air and the overlapping mountains was a good place. We kept playing like crazy until after 9 o'clock at night, when we split up and went to our respective houses. When I got home and saw that no one else was there, I remembered that my father had told me about Miss Land's family carrying the coffin, but I didn't believe it and I was not afraid. However, as I entered the alley on the west side of the village, I was startled to hear a strange sound from behind. When I turned around, I saw 4 strange-dressed men approaching me, carrying a large coffin. They were all dressed in gray cloth with red ribbons. Only then did I realize I had encountered the coffin-carrying individuals sought by the Tran family. These people would greet everyone they met, but it was said that if the person responded, the pain of the deceased would be transferred to that person. They had most likely been carrying for a few nights and haven't been able to talk to anyone. They took charge as soon as they saw me. They greeted me enthusiastically, but I had lived here since I was a child, and I know the rule: don't answer or say anything. But that person's words continued to irritate me. My throat and eyes were itchy and I really wanted to respond. Also, my mind appeared to be in control at the time, and the answer was about to be said. At this point, a young man rushed from behind, holding an SLR camera, photographing people carrying coffins. I recognized the young man as a visitor from somewhere else, not knowing how he ended up in our village. He was extremely inquisitive about everything. The man was unaware of the carrying coffin rule, so he approached the people carrying the coffin. The coffin carriers rejoiced when they saw this person take the initiative to speak. I believed the young man was my age, and I was concerned that he would do something bad. But before I could say anything, I noticed 4 people carrying coffins turned their heads to look at me sullenly, as if they were afraid I would ruin the plan. Those people's stares gave me chills. I was terrified. I knew people who accepted this type of carrying coffin were bad people. I was shocked, so I kept my mouth shut. To avoid trouble, I could only turn my head and walk towards the house. The young man continued to inquire. Those who carry the coffin appeared to deliberately turn the coffin's head towards the young man while answering. That night I ran home, but my father scolded me so harshly that I didn't dare to tell him about what had happened that night, so I went to bed. When I woke up on Monday morning, my mind was dizzy and a little sore. I was not sure if it had anything to do with what happened the night before. I staggered out of my room to find my parents eating breakfast and discussing a car accident. I moved forward immediately and listened to my father's words. But after hearing it, I got a chill down my spine and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The dead man turned out to be the young man who came to our village last night with an SLR camera. He stayed in a small hotel in our village last night, but he only checked out and walked out in the morning. A large garbage truck passed him and then lost control. The garbage truck sped up and slammed into the young man. He died on the spot, under the wheel, without having the time to react. I felt a pang of fear and guilt as soon as I heard the news. If I had stopped him last night, he wouldn't have died. But if he hadn't died, I would have replaced him. What about me? There were no solutions to these problems, but there was a legend here, and those who answered the coffin driver will have a few years of bad luck, and in the worst case, death. This story is about a rather scary case that Captain Chow had taken on. It was a massacre in a family. Only the lucky 7-year-old child still lived and was sent to a mental institution. The case that he had many strange points, so Captain Chow decided to turn the case over. Chow reached out to an industry friend who had participated in the investigation that year. However, he advised Captain Chow not to investigate the case again. But Captain Chow was adamant because he had a feeling that something was not clear. When Captain Chow arrived at the mental hospital, the colleague reminded Captain Chow that the son of the family was currently very mentally ill. And when coming to see that son, Captain Chow might not be able to investigate anything. The special thing was that the son always said that his father massacred the whole family because he was possessed by a ghost. At that time, the colleague was just starting out to work, but also witnessed the case that day. The whole family was brutally murdered. Captain Chow said that after reading the case report, he felt the son's testimony was very grounded. The colleague felt that Captain Chow must have a problem because he believed in this fictional story. Looking into the room, the son was now much older. He had a thin figure and was standing thoughtfully looking out the window. The teammate and Captain Chow entered the room. The son seemed very shy and panicked about everything. The policeman said hello to him, but he was very cautious. His eyes were sneaky and scared. The face was haggard as if running away from something. He signaled to everyone to keep their voices down because the thing could hear and kill them all. Then the son went under the bed to hide. Perhaps seeing his father kill the whole family made him obsessed. The colleague told Captain Chow that this crazy young man always hid from everyone around, and no one could come in close contact. Captain Chow still managed to sit down and reassure his son. Captain Chow used a soft voice and believable actions to build trust with the son. Under the bed, the son lit a lot of candles. "I believe you. Tell me about that day," Captain Chow said. After hearing that someone believed what he said, the son suddenly changed his face and hesitated whether to come out or not. His colleague and Captain Chow together pulled him out. Now he was calmer. Then the son sat crouched on the bed and was able to speak clearly. Captain Chow felt that it was just because he was too scared. The son was psychologically affected because he was young at that time. This time the son opened his heart more and began to remember the past. The colleague also built trust with the son, saying that the captain was very good, could solve all cases, so he told Captain Chow everything. Hearing this, the son suddenly asked for help from Captain Chow. He kept saying that his father was wronged. Captain Chow reassured him and asked him to tell every detail. There would be a way to clear the case. Then the son crouched on the bed and began to tell his story. He was about 7 years old that year. His family lived in a poor village but lived together very happily. That day his father came home early from work, so he bought gifts for the whole family. Dad loved his family very much and never raised his voice at him. That night the whole family of 5 sat together. His father pulled out supplies and food he bought while on a business trip, including candies and candles of all kinds. All were delicious. Candles were also very special, unlike ordinary candles. They also had a very pleasant fragrance. His grandmother loved the scent of his candle, so she showed it to grandfather. His grandfather said that he had heard about scented candles. Only rich people had because the scent was very pleasant. Immediately his grandmother lit the candle. The whole family gathered together very happily. The scent from the candle made the whole house fragrant. After a while, the candle was about to burn out. Suddenly the father's face began to deteriorate, sweating profusely and looking very tired. At this time, the father asked the family's permission to go inside and rest first.
Oh, he must have just come back from a long trip, so he's tired. Just let him go.
The grandfather told the family. While talking happily, the faces of the mother and son became frightened. The father was now acting crazy, holding a big knife, and was attacking the grandfather. Without mercy, the father cut his grandfather's head in half with a knife in front of the whole family. The wife and son were extremely scared to the point of being motionless, not knowing what was wrong with her husband. Everyone was shocked by what had just happened. Then the father seemed to be controlled by something. His eyes were white and he turned to look at the rest of the family with cold eyes. The grandmother could not run away in time because of her advanced age. She could only plead with her mouth. But she was also brutally murdered by him. After seeing that, the wife hugged her son and ran to the door to call for help. But the father saw them. His next target was his wife and son. He held a bloody knife in his hand and began to chase the mother and son out of the door. At the moment, the son looked back and discovered a terrible thing that haunted him to this day. It was behind the father. Another shadowy figure was following. The shadow looked at the mother and son and gave a creepy smile. As soon as she ran to the door, the wife immediately met a neighbor's family who was visiting, thinking that she would be saved. They were surprised to see that the wife, who was holding a child and covered in blood, also hurriedly asked, but the wife was too scared to run away. The wife couldn't stop and explain anything. She just told everyone to run away because her husband was crazy. Before understanding what was happening, the husband ran with a knife and slaughtered the poor neighbor's family. The wife was able to run away to the gate at this time, but because the woman was weak and still carrying a small child, she could not run fast. In the end, the husband caught the wife. He swung his knife and slashed at his wife's back, causing her pain. In an emergency, she was able to throw the child out, and she stayed behind to stop her husband. Before closing the gate herself, she could only scream for her child to run away. The carefree child could only watch his mother being murdered by his father. The last scene has haunted the son to this day. At that time, fortunately, the neighbors heard the noise, pulled over and arrested the husband, so the boy was able to escape death. Even now, sitting down to tell these stories, the son's body was still shaking with fear. The son thought that his father was possessed by a demon. This thing was the reason why his father killed the whole family. After hearing that, Captain Chow comforted him and left. The colleagues still couldn't believe that Captain Chow continued to want to turn this case over just because of the testimony of an abnormal person. The colleague told Captain Chow to relax and rest, why he had to find a job that made him so busy. But Captain Chow directly rejected him and firmly went to investigate this case. After seeing that Captain Chow was so determined, the colleague did not stop him anymore. He actively told the captain the specific address of the house where the murder took place, and still didn't forget to tell the captain to be careful. Captain Chow quickly came to the house that night. The house had been abandoned since the incident. Over the years, the house became dilapidated. Captain Chow opened the gate and shone his flashlight inside. The yard was overgrown with weeds and Captain Chow slowly entered the house. Very quickly he reached the inside of the house. The surrounding walls were rotting and seemed to fall at any moment. He flashed his flashlight around the house for clues. His flashlight suddenly went out, but obviously this was a new flashlight. How could the battery run out so quickly? He tried to tap the flashlight to light it up because it was impossible to see anything without the flashlight. Suddenly, he heard noises from behind, which made him wary. In the end, he had to light a match to catch some of the glimmers of light so he could see the way. He entered each room to look for clues, to to the room where the massacre began. He suddenly saw something mentioned in the story that the son had told. It was a candle that was bought by the father when he was on a business trip. Perhaps it was a good candle, so it had been intact for many years. Without thinking much, Captain Chow lit a match on the candle to make it easier to light things up, and thanks to the candle he continued to go around the house to investigate. As he was about to step out, Captain Chow felt someone standing behind him. Quickly turning to look back, the ghosts of the person who was murdered that year gradually appeared before his eyes. At first, the grandfather and the grandmother approached Captain Chow and appeared more and more clearly. Then both the wife and the husband as the killer also appeared and flew towards the captain. In the end, all the dead people appeared. For a moment, Captain Chow was terrified. They approached Captain Chow as if to attack him. Their faces were full of hatred and very scary. Immediately, one after another, the ghosts reached out and rushed towards Chow. Attacked so violently, Captain Chow dropped the candle and it went out. Captain Chow was strangled to the point that he thought he could no longer breathe, when suddenly an accident saved his life. Captain Chow had stepped on a nail. It had pinned his foot through his shoe. It hurt him, but it did wake him up. When he opened his eyes, the evil spirits he saw earlier had all disappeared. This made him begin to doubt the candle. He then quickly left the house to return to headquarters. At the headquarters, Captain Chow brought the candle back for forensic examination, and the result was that the fragrance for this lamp was a herb that could easily cause people to hallucinate. So what he saw at the house yesterday was a hallucination. Forensics also said that if the body was tired or stressed, it was easy to be affected by this candle. Hearing this, Captain Chow understood the problem, so he said goodbye to the medical examiner and left. He went straight to the mental hospital to report the results to the other mentally ill son. After hearing the truth, the son was surprised and couldn't believe his ears. Captain Chow also said that the murder had nothing to do with his father, and that the ghost he saw was also a hallucination, all by this candle. And Captain Chow also advised the son to forget the old story and start over. Everything was clear. Listening to the captain's advice, the son seemed to have returned to normal. As Captain Chow was about to leave, the manager at the hospital called him back. He wanted to thank Captain Chow. Thanks to him, the other son's condition was much better. And according to the manager at the hospital, maybe the son would be discharged soon and return to a normal life. As usual, Captain Chow and Boss Lu Feng discussed the cases at the 703 branch that morning. Captain Chow was informed by Boss Lu Feng of the recent crop situation in the area, and the fruit was always stolen or damaged. Boss Lu Feng was concerned that there were specialized thieves in the city. Captain Chow had also heard the news and intended to investigate on his own. Boss Lu Feng and Captain Chow were still discussing which case should be handled first, as there have been a number of strange incidents in the city recently. However, before they could have a long discussion, they heard from afar that their subordinates were rushing to report. The boss, Lu Feng, inquired what had occurred and why the subordinates were so concerned. However, the subordinate just stated that it was preferable for Boss Lu Feng to hear from the victim because this was a strange story. Boss Lu Feng directed that the victim was allowed into his room, that hot tea was prepared to calm the victim, and that he would be present. The victim was a middle-aged man who appeared terrified and panicked. The man was now calm and told his boss Lu Feng everything that had happened the day before. The man said that he and his 2 friends went to the forest on the mountain yesterday morning to gather medicine because it was rumored that deep within the mountain was a very rare medicinal herb. The 3 departed early in the morning with great enthusiasm. The man believed that with their many years of jungle experience, they would quickly find valuable medicinal plants. They went to the forest for a moment, but the large and dense forest ahead piqued their interest. As they stood on the cliff, looked down at the forest, they all thought that this trip would require them to spend the night in the forest. One of the group members appeared concerned, claiming that there were rumors of wild animals in the forest. But the man remained adamant, claiming that he had experience with the jungle and would lead everyone. So they kept walking, and after many hours of walking through the deep forest, they had to climb over steep rocky cliffs. The road was extremely difficult. As you climb higher, the fog became denser. They eventually arrived at the forest, which was rumored to precious medicinal plants. In front of them was a large forest with very large trees that appeared to have lived for many years. As they walked through the overgrown grass, luck smiled on them. Rare medicinal plants appeared in front of them. They were overjoyed and were discussing how to bring it home to grow so that they could have more trees. A strange sound was heard in the distance deep within the forest. All 3 people were thinking, not knowing if it was a wild animal or what, but they were also calm because of their experience in the jungle. But all their calm and fortitude vanished in an instant when they realized the creature in front of them was not what they thought. They panicked and trembled because there was a dragon in front of their eyes. It was unbelievable to make sense of this. It flew towards them, causing them to panic and flee, abandoning the medicinal plant, but they were unable to keep up with its excessive speed. These 2 friends were too terrified to run. They just stood there with their hands over their heads. But it was this that caused them harm. The dragon swung its tail, tightened its grip on one of them, which forced the others to climb. When viewed from above, the dragon appeared both majestic and terrifying. Like a god, it hovered and curled up in the sky. After only a few minutes, their friends stopped hearing the sound and dropped down from above the remnants of his shirt. They were terrified and scared. It was as if it was a warning to them that if they bothered it, they would die. The shirt was torn, bitten, and stained with the friends' blood and flesh. They immediately ran away from the forest to the side of the cliff. But it did not give them a chance to survive. With just 1 kick, they fell off the cliff. Another friend died after hitting his head on a rock and dying on the spot. Only the last man escaped death and came to the investigation team to report. He cried because he was still terrified. After hearing the victim's story clearly, Captain Chow was immediately ordered by boss Lu Feng to accompany him to the mountain area to investigate everything. In a short time, the squad led by boss Lu Feng left near the murder scene. Along the way, Captain Chow wondered whether dragons existed or not, and why there was such a strange case. Boss Lu Feng was a person with a lot of experience. He didn't confirm the existence of dragons in this world, but strange things happened every day in this world. According to the victim's story, the investigation team arrived at the scene quickly with modern facilities and specialized equipment. Boss Lu Feng ordered everyone to take a few steps forward in the review, but with extreme caution. After looking around for a while, the team found no unusual clues. Captain Chow and his boss also readied their guns and entered the murky forest. A shrill hiss rang out from the deep forest, getting closer and louder. They took a defensive stance and prepared to fight because they didn't know what kind of animal it was. From a distance, suddenly something strange beyond imagination appeared, surprising the team as they immediately attacked it with guns. Both Captain Chow and Boss Lu Feng were so surprised they couldn't believe their eyes. In front of them was indeed a dragon. It was large, hovering in the sky and extremely ferocious. The whole squad joined forces to attack, firing many shots at it continuously, but it was not injured at all. It began to swoop low, move towards the ambush team. Its body was made of sharp iron blades, and it only needed to fly past the police officers' bodies. Before it could react, the flesh was shattered and the blood began to flow uncontrollably. Boss Lu Feng directed the injured policeman to move back in order to stop the bleeding. He appeared to have discovered something strange for a brief moment. There were numerous grasshoppers with large sizes and unusual colors on the ground. Finally, he almost discovered the mystery of this ferocious dragon. He shouted loudly to get everyone prepared to fight it. He quickly ordered Captain Chow to change his fighting style because he realized why guns couldn't hurt it. He quickly pulled out a flamethrower, seemed very certain of his thoughts. Because the entire squad only had a few flamethrowers, everyone was focused on fighting it. And, as Boss Lu Feng had predicted, the flamethrower worked. Its body started to burn. Strangely, all bullets couldn't hurt it, but just a small amount of fire could cause it to burn, just like that. It fled into the forest, but its body was falling apart one by one. We were still unsure what kind of creature it was. The entire squad couldn't hide their puzzlement. There were too many confusing and strange things in this case. Finally, the dragon vanished in the air, and every piece of it fell to the ground, bloodless and fleshless. Boss Lu Feng was still skeptical of his thoughts, whether correct or incorrect. Before they could state their guesses clearly to Captain Chow, a swarm of burnt locusts descended from the sky in front of their eyes. Those locusts must have fallen from the dragon, or there would have been no dragon at all. When they looked closer, they noticed that these grasshoppers were huge, each larger than a human hand, with strange colors and sharp serrated legs. Having witnessed everything, Boss Lu Feng confirmed all of his speculations. He ordered that the area be sealed off and no one be allowed to enter because no one knows if there was anything more dangerous than this dragon. They returned to the branch after completing the task to summarize everything. According to forensic testing, the herb had the ability to mutate insects, made them larger and smarter. As a result, the insects in that forest most likely ate that herb. Captain Chow was astounded when he saw the dragon made of grasshoppers, so he ordered the return of that valuable plant because he didn't want other insects to mutate in the same way. Captain Chow's decisions have pleased Captain Lu Feng. He believed that everything should be resolved at the source, rather than leaving consequences to be dealt with later. And the dragon murder case was finally closed. The main character of the story was Anton, a dealer who went to the mountain alone that year to import medicinal herbs. He arrived in Damgon village, which was located deep in the mountains and had extremely inconvenient traffic. This was a location that produced high-quality medicinal herbs, but due to transportation issues, very few people came to pick up the goods. As a result, the price of medicinal herbs was quite low here, and it met Anton's criteria. The people here were very welcoming, and when Anton arrived from elsewhere to buy medicinal herbs, the village chief immediately exhorted the people in the village to arrange for him to stay. It only took them a few minutes to find an empty house in the village for Anton to rest. Not only that, the villager chief also requested that his wife prepared a lavish dinner for him. The village chief then quickly left. When he arrived at the gate, he abruptly turned his head and told Anton not to go out at night. The village chief's statement piqued everyone's interest. Anton, on the other hand, didn't think much of it, quickly packing his bags and eating dinner. After a long day, Anton dozed off as soon as he sat down on the bed. The countryside, particularly in the mountains, had a very quiet atmosphere. The cool breeze also caused Anton to fall asleep gradually. He had no idea that something horrible was about to happen to him. At exactly midnight, a woman's pitiful cry could be heard from outside, and that sound jolted Anton awake. Despite the low volume, the cry created a sense of anxiety and insecurity in the listener. Anton stood up and wanted to go outside to see what was going on. The crying could clearly be heard coming from the courtyard, but when Anton went outside there was no one there and the crying ceased. He was about to return to the house to sleep when he heard another cry from the back of the house. The cry was sad, but also spooky and strange. After going around the house, Anton came to a halt in front of the yard's corner, where a well was located. At the time, there was a woman crying on the edge of the well. Anton couldn't see the woman's face clearly because it was dark and she had her back turned, but her crying was heartbreaking. Anton, moved by pity, approached slowly to inquire about her story and console the poor girl. However, Anton was taken aback when he placed his hand on the woman's shoulder because the woman's body was extremely cold. The woman turned her head with a ghostly smile before Anton could react. Her face was haggard and pale, and her eyes were deep, and she didn't appear to be a regular person. Anton was afraid to scream loudly, so he turned to flee, but the woman caught him by the wrist. Due to the ghost's control, Anton was so terrified that his face turned pale and he felt a sharp pain in his wrist, the ghost's hand hooking into his skin. Anton jumped up, realizing it was all a dream. As a result of the intense pain, his face was still filled with fear at this point. Anton tried to remain calm and reassure himself that his nightmare could have been caused by being overtired. At the same time, Anton felt a sharp pain in his wrist, looked up and saw 5 black fingerprints. In the dream, he was also grabbed by the witch's arm. However, when Anton looked around, he was astounded to see that the door was open and that some footprints stretched from the bed to the floor. Convinced that there was a thief in the house, Anton quickly glanced at the money bag next to him, which remained in the same position without moving. So who left a trace? Despite his fear, Anton was still curious about this to find out what had happened. He followed the trail of black footprints. As he walked behind the house, a gloomy atmosphere began to emerge. Anton's heart began to have a bad premonition as well. There was a well in front of Anton now, just like in a dream, except there was no ghost sitting on the well's wall and no ghostly cry. Anton had a feeling what he had just witnessed was more than a nightmare. Everything had to be related to the well in front of him. So Anton summoned his courage to walk towards the well, then placed his hand on the well wall and crawled inside to investigate. Anton saw nothing but dense water at the bottom of the well. The water surface, on the other hand, was constantly rippled as if something was about to happen. Just as Anton was about to return inside, a figure in the water appeared out of nowhere. If you looked closely, you could see that it was a woman's silhouette. When he saw the terrible scene in front of him, Anton's face darkened instantly. He screamed in fear and then backed away slowly due to inertia. When he stayed back, he ran into someone, quickly turned around, and Anton recognized the person was the village chief. The village chief's appearance at this moment was like Anton's savior. Anton hurriedly informed the village chief of his dream of a ghost and followed her in their footsteps to the strange well. Anton was then reassured by the village chief and led into the house. The chief began to tell him a story after he had calmed down. 7 years ago, a merchant who purchased medicinal herbs came to the village and was warmly welcomed. He was able to purchase medicinal herbs from the villagers at a reasonable price. However, after he left, everyone discovered that the money they had received was all counterfeit. Pam was one of the people who sold them medicinal herbs. He didn't want to be screwed after 2 years of hard work collecting herbs, so he went to the merchant's house to get his money back. However, 3 years had passed and Pam had not returned. When the villagers learned that he had died in a foreign land, Pam's wife couldn't take it any longer and jumped into the well to commit suicide. When the village chief finished telling the story, Anton felt a pang of sympathy, but no less fear. So the woman he met in his dream had to be Pam's wife. Suddenly, the village chief pulled a wooden stick from his belt, and a few villagers with knives and sticks burst in through the door, asking Anton to let them check his bag. Anton immediately refused, but the villagers eventually subdued him. A villager handed over his money bag to the village chief. When the village chief and some young men took the money from Anton's bag, they discovered it was all counterfeit. When his deception was exposed, Anton began to cry, pleading with the villagers to spare him. Of course, the villagers were unconcerned by his words. They despised scammers because of what happened to them 7 years ago. The village chief was the most enraged because he was Pam's father. He swung his wooden stick angrily at Anton, imagining his son being murdered by scammers. Anton was hit in the head with a stick before he could react. The stick immediately struck his head, splattering blood everywhere. In fear, Anton begged the village chief, but he was now completely transformed into a different person. He approached Anton slowly by an enraged expression. It appeared that the village chief was attempting to avenge his son by killing all of the scammers. He raised his stick again and struck Anton hard on the head. After being knocked unconscious, Anton was ruthlessly thrown off the cliff by the villagers. Anton miraculously avoided death. He then reported the incident to the police and was sentenced to prison for using counterfeit money. Those people who were with murder plots in Damgon village were also punished by law.
This eerie tale unfolds within the confines of my grandmother's house, with my uncle serving as the central character. Throughout his life, he was engrossed in his studies and didn't have to worry about much. My grandmother held a deep affection for him. Upon completing his education, my uncle secured a desirable position at a manufacturing factory in the district. Typically, he resided in the workers' dormitory and visited home only occasionally. However, on this particular occasion, my grandmother was celebrating her birthday, prompting my grandfather to invite my uncle to join the festivities. To reach home from the district, my uncle had to take a bus journey lasting approximately an hour and a half, followed by traversing a mountain trail leading to the house. Due to his delayed bus, darkness had already fallen by the time my uncle set foot on the mountain trail. As he walked with his head lowered, he suddenly noticed a figure ascending the hill in the distance. My uncle was compelled to halt, sensing an abnormality in the stranger's gait. This person's head hung askew and he stumbled towards my uncle. As they drew closer, my uncle was jolted to witness the man's upper body vanishing, replaced by a horrific sight of blood. My uncle's recollection ends there. By this time it was well past 10 p.m. and he had yet to return home. Apprehension enveloped the entire family. Armed with a flashlight, my aunt ventured out to locate him. Upon reaching the village gate, she noticed someone roaming nearby. It was my uncle. Annoyed by his tardiness, she confronted him, but my uncle remained silent. When she shone the flashlight on his face, she was taken aback. His head drooped, his eyes were lifeless and white, and his skin sagged and wrinkled like that of a deceased person. Hurriedly, my aunt assisted my uncle into the house, calling out for help from anyone present. The sight of my uncle sent chills down the spines of the entire family. My grandfather, possessing a wealth of knowledge, proposed that my uncle might be possessed by a demon. Upon hearing this assertion, everyone in the house came to believe it, yet they were at a loss regarding the subsequent course of action. In this moment of distress, My grandfather instructed my aunt to contact Miss Grandma 7, my grandmother's biological sister, for assistance. Accompanied by my eldest uncle, my aunt set out to fetch her. Being over 70 years old with frail legs and feet, Miss Grandma 7 could no longer walk. They settled her in the back seat to the car, with my aunt accompanying her by foot. Upon their arrival, Miss Grandma 7 entered my uncle's room, engaging in a conversation that seemed directed at someone unseen. She spoke sternly and repeatedly whipped my uncle as if attempting to deter her presence. Her actions alternated between beating, scolding, and gentle yet firm speech. Suddenly, my uncle sat upright, assuming a vastly different voice. He claimed to be over 35 and expressed a desire to return home and see his wife and children. Tears streamed down his face. He recounted a tragic story of being a neighboring villager who worked outside and had rushed back on a stormy night after his wife gave birth. The treacherous mountain road, muddy and slippery due to the heavy rain, caused him to slip and fall down the slope, striking his head on the rock. Half of his face was crushed, and his untimely demise prevented him from witnessing his newborn child's face, leaving behind lingering resentment. The tragic nature of his account left everyone in a state of confusion. Sensing the urgency, Grandma 7 gestured for my uncle's family to swiftly prepare the car. They transported my uncle to the location mentioned by the ghostly figure from the neighboring village. Informing his wife of the incident, they requested her to hold her baby. However, she couldn't help but feel a mix of suspicion and fear upon witnessing my uncle's unsettling appearance. Observing the individual clutching the child, Grandma 7 adamantly refused to let go. She urged him to depart swiftly, allowing the infant to breathe freely. At that moment, his wife stepped forward and snatched the child from his grasp. My uncle gazed at his wife and children, his love for them palpable, and he was reluctant to part ways. Sensing his hesitation, Grandma 7 disciplined him with a whip. The impact rendered my uncle weak, and he collapsed to the ground. My aunt and uncle rushed to his aid. After that incident, my uncle's countenance returned to normal, but he had no recollection of what had transpired. The only memory he retained was encountering the man on the mountain. Following the event, Grandma 7 bestowed upon my uncle a peace charm, ensuring he remained free from further misfortunes.
This is a story told by a best friend of mine, Son, who used to work in the quarry. During a visit to my hometown, I ran into Son again while walking down the street. Thankfully, Son still remembered me. All day the two of us cheerfully talked to each other. Then, on the occasion of meeting again, I invited Son to a nearby pub to have a few drinks together. We went to the familiar pub that Son and I used to go to when we had free time. Son and I drank together and revisited old stories. Son said he had just quit his job at the quarry and was unemployed. When I got a bit drunk, I asked Son about the reasons why the quarry was closed. Son recollected the old story. The quarry had to be closed, he said, because weird things had happened. His words made me extremely surprised and curious. So Son took a sip of wine and started telling me the whole story. He said, before all the horrible things happened, he also encountered a few ghosts. That's when Son and a few other workers got to work in their assigned area. There was a warning sign inside the tunnel at that time. Despite many people's warnings, Son volunteered to work there anyway. He entered alone, and the deeper he went, the colder and darker it became.
The road stretched on indefinitely. The railroad junction was more clearly divided by the middle. Sun did not think of any danger or things to be cautious of as he stepped in confidently. Suddenly, Sun heard human footsteps. Stunned and curious, Sun turned around to look behind him to witness a very strange scene. Another worker, wearing an old uniform, was walking at the end of the abandoned tunnel. In the dark, Sun could not see the man's face clearly, but his body looked strange compared to the workers he worked with. Sun stood there, puzzled. He tried shining a flashlight at the man, but the man did not react. Sun was even more surprised. He decided to ask about the man. Hearing Sun's voice, the strange and mysterious man turned his gaze to Sun and answered with a deep, terrifying voice.
I am going to work.
After saying that, the man turned away again, not paying attention to Sun anymore. But he looked like he was doing something strange. When Sun wondered about this, he approached him even closer than before. He planned to ask the man a few questions, but when he accidentally shined the light on his feet, he saw that the old man was only wearing one shoe, which made Sun feel even more confused and curious. Then Sun also saw that this guy's whole leg and foot was injured to the point he could not wear any shoes, so Sun asked about his team information. The man answered Sun as he walked. He said he worked in the rock digging of the left tunnel. Hearing this, Sun was even more surprised, as it was clear that the tunnel on the left was reassembled with his own hands. Who was this man? Why was he entering that area? Sun turned to observe the man's movements. Found him just standing still, staring at the rocks in front of him without saying anything. Sun now seemed impatient. He asked the man seriously, "So, where are your team members?" The man began to let out cold sighs, sounding a bit sad without answering Sun's question. Sun did not ask anything anymore. He just silently waited for an answer from him. But at one point, the coldness and gloom from the man made Sun feel a little nervous and confused. He repeated the question again. This time the man turned to look at him once again and said,
"They are all saved."
When seeing the man's face and figure clearly, Sun felt real panic. Half of his body was sinking into a dark space that couldn't be seen since a while ago. It was just a patch of bright red blood. Sun collapsed on the ground, gulping with his mouth wide open, and could not say a word when he saw half of the crushed body in front of him. Sun realized at this time this man was already dead, which paralyzed him with fear. He was too scared to turn around and look at the old man again while crawling away. Coming out of the cave, Sun panicked and screamed while running to his colleagues. As he ran, he looked back at the man in the quarry. He was still standing there looking at him with his whole body completely covered in darkness. Running for a while, he accidentally ran into a man coming towards him. Sun was frightened. The sweaty man looked up, quickly realizing that it was the mining team's leader, one of his superiors. Meeting his colleague, Sun immediately panicked and explained, pointing towards where he met the ghost man, and said that someone had injured his face. The boss finished listening to Sun and curiously decided to go in and check it out. But when other people arrived, everything changed. Sun too expressed his surprise at the reality of the matter. There was no one in the rock pit at that time, just an empty space. Sun's leader immediately turned to him and asked,
"Is it true that you met an injured man here?"
Sun nodded in fear. His face turned pale, then fainted. because he was overcome by fear. His colleagues saw that and immediately took him away to be cared for. They took Sun to the infirmary to rest. It seemed to the others like Sun was so tired he might have been hallucinating. Then Sun immediately got a high fever. It was not until noon that he regained his consciousness. In the afternoon, when everyone in the quarry was over, they immediately came to the medical office to visit him, including the manager who had the longest working experience there. This manager asked him about everything. Sun did not hide it and told him everything. The manager listened and sighed, telling Sun that the man he saw actually worked and died at the quarry. After that, the manager immediately told him about the incident that day. At the time, he was just an ordinary worker like Sun. While working, a loud noise rang out. The people in the quarry at the time was all in panic as they hurriedly pulled each other in closer to consider the situation. Inside it was a mess. Huge rocks fell from above, blocking their entrance. Sun's manager that year was the one who mobilized a team of workers to use their hands to bring each stone out to find their brothers trapped inside. The workers working on the road had fractured bones and were severely injured and taken to the emergency room immediately after. But while cleaning up the pile of soil and rock, the rescue team accidentally discovered an ill-fated worker. That was the man that Sun had met. His body was crushed in half by tumbling stones as he died. As they took out the photo, the workers looked at him and everyone felt pity and pain for him and his crushed body, blotched with his blood. What was most striking was one side of his body was without shoes. Since the accident, many people have seen a man with one leg without shoes appearing around the quarry area. After telling the story to Sun, the manager advised Sun to pay respect to the man. Sun listened to the manager's words. That afternoon, he went up the hill near the quarry, took paper money and burned it for the soul of the unfortunate worker. Out of pity for his situation, Sun did not forget to burn an old shoe completely too. Looking at the burning shoes in the fire, Sun felt sad. After hearing the story, I told Sun that he had nothing to do with the reason the quarry got closed. It was because of the ghost. However, Sun told me that it was a long time ago. Now that he remembered, he was actually still afraid. He needed to drink more to forget his fears before he can easily continue. So, unable to suppress my curiosity, I kept pouring wine for Sun. We were drinking together for a while until late afternoon. The more influenced by the drink Sun became, the more he had the courage to recall other stories to tell me. We drank until our faces were red. I asked Sun if he had the courage to continue telling me now. His face changed slightly, saying that somehow the more he drank, the more scared he actually became. After hearing that, I even teased Sun. Haha, you better admit you have the energy to attract demons, right? But Sun did not look happy. He saw this as a great inconvenience to encounter such dread, misery and sadness from the afterlife. That year, when he just joined the quarry, he did not know anything about the strange happenings around it. On the first day, he was assigned by his superiors to go inside the tunnel to dig soil. Sun was very friendly with everyone. Because he was the first newcomer, he happily accepted the invitation without thinking too much. Sun, alone, brought lights and digging tools into the tunnel. Inside, the air was quite stuffy. As he entered, Sun looked around to search for his place and gear. Under the dim lights of the dark path, Sun could feel the coldness radiating from the place. Sun took a deep breath to regain his composure and continued straight inside. Near the end of the tunnel, he discovered a strange fog from out of nowhere covering his path. In that fog, Sun saw strange lights floating in the sky.
Sun was surprised when he did not understand what the lights were. But he did not think too much of it, while slowly walking in step by step. But as he went deeper, Sun felt something behind him. Sometimes he had to turn his head to take a look. When he faced back to front, he suddenly saw a strange black shadow standing in front of him, which felt like it was there since before the moment he was shocked by it. As a premonition, there was danger lurking, and Sun quickly shouted, "Hey brother, that area is dangerous," as if trying to prevent the man from entering the dark danger zone. But the person was still walking into the eerie dark. However, none of Sun's words were effective. When Sun noticed this, he immediately pursued the man. But after a short distance, he abruptly came to a halt. Sun became aware of something beneath his feet when a pool of dark water appeared out of nowhere. So Sun fidgeted, like he pickled his feet to see it, but felt this mucus had a very high adhesion, and he seemed to be being pulled downwards by it. He was afraid to ask for help, but only his voice echoed back. There was no one inside the quarry. He was scared and did not know what to do. Suddenly the dark liquid seemed to be creeping up to his ankles. He looked down at his feet fearfully, feeling like he was tricked into being stuck there in the sticky water. While he was struggling with low guard, a slimy shadow appeared from behind him and gave him a ghostly smile. He heard the sound behind his back, quickly turning his head around to look. Sun screamed when he witnessed the monstrosity. The slimy black shadow rushed like lightning to grab Sun. Sun feared. He tried to find a way to get out of this entity's control, but at this moment he discovered that at his feet many hands were rising out from the darkness. Sun was absolutely terrified with fear, screaming as loudly as he could in the abandoned tunnel. Arms covered with black mucus stinking up from under the swamp immediately raised up as if they wanted to grab Sun. They crawled while rubbing the filthy stuff all over his body, making him terrified. Sun looked straight ahead. There were more monstrosities appearing from the quagmire, rushing towards him. They revealed their horrifying forms. Each layer of mucus on their bodies slowly dripped away, revealing a dry skeleton that appeared horrifying. The quagmire at Sun's feet was getting deeper. The monstrosities dragged Sun down below one by one. Sun no longer had the strength to control himself. The stench of the liquid was overpowering as it poured into his mouth. Sun explained that his entire body froze. Sun's tears began to flow as a result of his fear as the quagmire reached his ears. He was dragged completely under the quagmire in a matter of seconds, which was more terrifying than the countless entities pulling him down from below. A black space enveloped Sun, and everything around him responded. Sun completely lost consciousness. He seemed to subconsciously sink deeper below as he heard someone calling his name before passing out. The next thing Sun remembered was vomiting as the dark liquid came out of his exhausted body. Anxious co-workers who dragged him out was asking what was wrong with him. Luckily, Sun woke up after he vomited. Then he leaned his back on the nearby rock, gasping for breath, speechless about what he experienced. Waiting for him to completely calm down, he turned to ask his colleagues if they saw anyone inside the tunnel. However, they said that they could not see anyone but him. They recounted their episode as the whole team split up to try and find him. Then they came to the end of the tunnel. They discovered something terrible. They discovered Sun's face down in a dark pool of water on the ground. Then they dashed over to Sun and dragged him out of the sticky puddle. Fortunately, they all arrived in time before Sun had suffocated. Perhaps poisonous gas inside the area caused Sun to faint and fall into the puddle by accident.
Son was then taken to the medical room to rest, but all the time he couldn't say a word. He could only lie on the bed and throw up mucus. The manager, who was also eventually present in the infirmary, came to ask him about his health. Seeing Son's condition at the time, he also realized a strange thing had happened. He told Son that the place where he was in distress was a dangerous place. There were a lot of toxic gases in the area which suffocated a series of workers. Too many people died unjustly, but he could not stop the quarry because the investors sent the feng shui teacher to back the area. After that, the manager advised Son not to come to the quarry to work in the near future, but instead go home to rest and wait until he has psychologically recovered. But then, Son's story passed to the big boss, a rich man with a lot of money. Early in the morning, the boss called Son to his private meeting room. He did not ask about Son's condition, nor cared about the incident or what he experienced. Instead, he just told Son that he has worked hard and that he was not allowed to take leave, but he must keep this a secret. He gave him a large sum of money with the request that he kept it a secret. Naturally, Son agreed to deal with him. But that, along with the story of where he met the soul of the man who died in the quarry, made him lose faith in the fat boss and his intentions. Son stated that he agreed to his terms because he needed the money. As I heard it, I asked Son, "Are you not afraid of being followed by these ghosts?" Son shook his head. He confidently took out one of his protective pendants as he mentioned that this would help him ward off evil spirits. When I looked at the charm, it was also very interesting. But Son didn't mind because now the quarry was abandoned. We sat and drank a few more drinks when Son eventually told me that the owner died a shady death. I was curious listening to Son tell the rest of the story. It was a time of wet weather, so it caused mines to easily collapse. That day, Son was called by the manager to go down to the basement level. They needed to clear an important path. The tunnel was somehow blocked by a very thick rocky layer. The workers here struggled to carry heavy iron drills on their shoulders, stabbing at rocky walls with just their bare hands. After long periods of hard work, the stone wall would finally break into a large round hole. The manager, who was also the leader and responsible for the day, rushed over to check on the situation. He approached, stood close inside the hole, put his eyes on it. The space inside was dark and gloomy, and a strong stench appeared. When he looked closely, he realized in panic that underneath it was really a deep lake, not a tunnel as people said. He and his subordinates stood above the hole, the depth of which made him dizzy. But something strange happened to the manager in that dark space. He tried to shine the light down deep enough to see what was inside the hole, but he couldn't see inside because he was too high. He called in Son and others to help. The weak light of the flashlight on the hat was not bright enough for him and everyone to know what was inside that hole. He felt a little bit tense, so he thought about how to make this deep hole brighter to make work easier. Then, with his years of experience, he finally came up with a good idea. So he told his subordinates to take off their helmets and tie them together so that the light could be brighter together. Then he held the rope firmly in his hands, slowly dropping the hats down the tunnel one by one. The helmets were slowly lowered. It seemed that below was quite deep. At that point, everyone realized in panic that the hole was indeed deeper than everyone thought. What a horror when the hats just reached the bottom, revealing horrible things that resembled human bodies lying in a crimson lake of blood. The corpses below appeared to be extremely strange. When the manager witnessed the scene, he became terrified, unable to believe his eyes. Son witnessed the horror that left him speechless, and the other workers questioned them, asking if they were the previous team and what the owner of this mine was hiding. The manager was trembling and nervous, and his guesses were the same as the other workers. Then he decided to pick up the bodies below to find out what was going on. He then sent Sun and the other workers to get the salvage tools. An iron anchor was fastened to the end of a rope. The manager held the rope tightly, slowly lowering the anchor to the bottom. It had to be difficult, as he was able to hook it onto the monstrous corpse at the bottom. Feeling that the rope was entangled by a heavy object, the manager called his subordinates to help him bring up the things below. Even stranger was a strange light appearing from the body of the corpse. The body was then pulled upwards as everyone realized that this was not a normal human corpse. Sun also expressed panic when things were getting more serious than people thought. It was actually a corpse of a man. His whole body was drenched not by water but with blood, which was more frightening than the mummified corpse. The manager, after looking at the corpse for a bit, discovered that a large capsule was inserted into the middle of the body. When the manager saw it, he curiously picked it up to inspect it. He and his subordinates quickly realized that it was a gemstone. Everyone seemed to have guessed a little bit about a horror story that happened to the people lying in the depths of the pit. Below this area, there must have been dozens of corpses. It was like a mass burial pit of some kind. The other workers listened to the story, and we were extremely curious. Everyone was in disbelief of the horror that the manager's group had found. They stood clustered on the crater, curiously looking inside to see if the manager's rumors were true or not. When looking inside, everyone gasped in surprise because there were so many corpses below. These corpses looked like they died long ago, with bizarre shapes. No one resembled anyone, but they looked like they were in pain. The manager, standing from afar, further affirmed to the workers here that they were all real mummies, long dead. An old man in the line, when he saw the horror scene and heard the manager's acknowledgements, he was suddenly startled and shouted loudly. Everyone then turned their attention to him. In fact, before the manager, this guy had the longest working experience there. He addressed everyone with a voice full of danger and certainty that the bodies below were the workers who used to work here and were victims of a mass murder. The workers were surprised and scared, as well as extremely curious about the cause of the terrifying incident. Seeing the situation as it was, the old man realized he couldn't hide it any longer and immediately informed everyone about the truth. Despite the danger, the owner of this business really wanted to exploit the gems. Some admitted that when he found out, he wanted to ask for wages and resign, but he was beaten by a match. However, in order to keep the secret, the master's juniors were continually threatened. The boss promised to pay the workers more if they kept it a secret and dig deeper to increase productivity in finding gemstones. Following orders to prevent things from being revealed, the boss and his partners discussed killing all of the workers in order to eliminate them from revealing the secret to anyone. The workers were thrown into a rocky pit and buried alive beneath it. This was also where the manager discovered the workers' bodies at the time. After hearing the story, a group of workers decided to meet with their boss the next morning to make their resignation. They marched to the boss's office, but when they called again and again, no one answered. Sensing something strange, everyone immediately opened the door to go inside. But there was no one inside, not even a shadow of a person. No one could know where the boss was, and the door was not locked either. People began to worry that the boss was fleeing when a worker emerged from nowhere and announced that he had seen the boss with a strange expression last night. When he went to the bathroom last night, he noticed the boss walking to the quarry with an odd expression on his face. He was sluggish, like a somnambulist, with a pale face and white eyes, as if he had lost his soul. The worker felt strange, but then did not care. But waiting forever, the worker did not see his boss coming back from the tunnel. From as of this morning, they did not see him at all. Everyone looked at each other with bewildered eyes. No one knew what was going on. But with an uneasy instinct in their hearts, everyone rushed inside to check. Arriving at the horror scene ahead shocked the workers. His body was mixed with the bodies of the ill-fated workers who had been killed by him. After the incident, the quarry was closed. Sun and the other workers had to return to town to find their other jobs. The quarry had not been visited since then, but it was strange that there was always a plentiful source of food for cattle. That's why people in the village often brought their own animals to graze there. After hearing the story, Sun laughed with a gloomy expression when he recalled that the evil owner was punished. I believe Sun is safe now. After all of this, he seemed happier to have spoken about it as we continued to drink. We sat and drank till late at night, then we eventually collapsed on the table. I don't know if his stories were true or if it was because he added many monstrous details, but who knows what weird things were in those deep mines.